I'm Kathleen Matthews, and for many years anchored the local ABC News here in Washington, D.C. And I'm really pleased to be here with Julia and also this stellar panel of women ambassadors to the U.S. In my current role, I work for Marriott International, the global hotel company, and we have hotels in 80 countries around the world. And so I'm on the road constantly, and I have to say, when I visit countries and I meet women, heads of state, women ministers, women ambassadors, I'm always surprised and delighted because there are still so few of them. It's getting better, but the progress has been, I think, glacially slow, certainly from a women's perspective. So if you take a look at the world's 196 countries, 195 if you don't include Taiwan in that number, there are really only about 25 women heads of state, whether they are queens, prime ministers, or presidents. And similarly, if you take a look at the ambassadors to the U.S., we have about 176. There's still only about 25-ish, 20-something women ambassadors to the U.S. It's almost not surprising because heads of state tend to pick representatives of their government in other countries that look like them. So today we have three, and Julia and I'll have a conversation with them to talk about sort of their careers, but also their perspectives, because we want to give you that international perspective. So to my right, Ambassador Ann Anderson. She is the first woman ambassador from Ireland to the U.S., but she has served at the United Nations, in France, at the European Union, so has a really stellar career representing her government around the world. And to her right, you have the ambassador from Argentina, Cecilia Nahon. And Cecilia is Argentina's first woman ambassador to the United States, representing her president, who was a woman, President Kirchner of Argentina. She previously worked in the foreign ministry as the Secretary of International Economic Relations. And then to her right is Ambassador Liberata Mulamula, and she was the senior personal assistant to the President of Tanzania before being appointed ambassador to the United States. She actually has also served previously in Canada and also in Burundi. So Julia, I'm going to just let you open up with sort of our conversation of these women ambassadors, because we want them to talk about what life is like for women in their country compared to women in the U.S., but also what their careers have been like as they've kind of moved into this rarefied universe that they are part of.
So I'm Julia Ioffe. I, until very recently, was a senior editor at the New Republic, and I mostly cover Russia. And from what I saw covering Russia, women aren't taken very seriously, even when they're, in the highest ranks of government or business. And I know that former Secretary Clinton, when she would go to Russia to speak with her counterparts, had a hard time being taken seriously and being seen as a Secretary of State rather than a woman first. And I was wondering if this is something you all encounter when you're at the table with a lot of men.
Yeah, let me first of all, in the diplomatic world, what we know best is to thank. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and Catherine and Julie, we are pleased to be here. Of course, what you have said of Russia, I can't say that is what is in Tanzania. I come from Tanzania, and when President Obama was visiting our countries last summer, and when he was addressing a group of people in South Africa, he said, he was quoting his mother, and he says, if you want to measure how well the country does, you see how it treats its women. So for Tanzania, I must say we have been a bit lucky that at least at the leadership level, there's a lot of respect for women. It's not that we have had everything has been rosy, we have all these chances, but our men presidents have tried a lot, especially the president now, who has been in power for almost 10 years. He has made what has never happened. He's appointed more women than any other, maybe president in Africa. And it's not just appointing them to small jobs, petty jobs, but also in very high positions. My colleagues are the first ambassadors to the US. I'm the second. because we have had first, we have the second, but it also took a while. The challenges, of course, which we face, I think are all common. We still have this what they call glass ceiling of perceptions, and for Africa is even worse. Our traditions, they don't give a woman a place like this, because I always tell people, I said my grandmother, if she was alive and see me talking in front of people, it would say that it's not a good thing for a woman. I was supposed to speak in low tones. I'm not supposed to shout. I'm not supposed to. So this was how we were brought up. But then I must say we are trying to overcome those barriers and the ceilings that's always hovering over our heads. Thank you.
Cecilia, sure.
Hello, how are you? And thank you very much as well for letting me share this panel with my colleagues and with yourselves. I can say that in the case of Argentina, we have many important females in our history that have been very important leaders and that have moved forward our rights, our human rights, but also more broadly that have worked very strongly for a more fair and a more just society. I am part here representing Argentina in the US of a broader trend in our country that has given females a very growing role in public life. And this is also reflected in the very important fact that we have our first democratically elected woman as president. She has been elected in 2007, and more importantly, she was re-elected 4 years later with a 54% of support in our country. So women have been really increasingly being more and more involved in public life in Argentina, not only in the executive branch, but also if we take a look at our Congress, we can see that Argentina ranks among the top 20 countries in the world in terms of female participation in Congress. Around 40% of our Congress representatives are women. And this is, again, I think, part of a broader trend in our country of women having the chance to really get more and more involved in public affairs, but also in other aspects of life. It's not only in politics, it's also in other elements where we can see a growing influence. We have strong leaders, and we are very proud of them and their contribution to our country.
And how about in your country?
Yeah, I think your question was, do you feel you're taken seriously? And I'm pondering that. I've been over 40 years a career diplomat, and I can certainly see the arc of change over that time. You still get the occasional sexist comment, but it's so occasional that you can brush it off. But 40 years has seen incredible change. Obviously, the country has changed, the international environment has changed. We have become more senior in our professions. It's difficult to take, a senior ambassador lightly or to make a sexist comment. It's much easier to be dismissive of somebody who is more junior in the hierarchy. But Ireland has certainly changed enormously. We've now had 2 women presidents. We have a woman deputy prime minister. But more than that, the atmosphere has changed. The laws have changed. Anything that is, of course, anything that's harassment is punishable by the law. But anything that is seen as chauvinistic or patronizing or dismissive is just not acceptable anymore. And that has been a significant change. So yes, I do feel I'm taken seriously. As I say, you still have to brush off the occasional remark that you feel is inappropriate. But that's something that is much, much, much rarer than it used to be.
In this country, there's a big conversation around the importance of elevating women and particularly elevating and educating young girls as part of really an economic development strategy, that if you don't tap into that human capital, you are squandering a tremendous resource. Is this part of the conversation in your countries? Are people looking at their growth strategy? Are your leaders looking at their growth strategy actually being tied to the economic empowerment of women in your countries?
Oh, yes. I think that is very, very significant, what's happening in Ireland. There has been enormous progress in education generally. But I think the one aspect that I would pick out is that people know women are still very underrepresented in the STEM sector, science, technology, engineering, medicine. And we know for a country like ours that relies very much on high-tech industry, high growth in that area, we need to get more women into the STEM sectors. And I think the government is very conscious of that because we rely, for our attraction of foreign industry, all of that. Talent is our number one sales point. And so we need all our talent. Women represent 50% of that talent. We have a very young, educated workforce, but we definitely need to push more women into the STEM sector.
I've heard this conversation quite a bit in emerging markets, markets that really have great growth potential. Is this the conversation happening in Argentina and Tanzania as well?
Yes, indeed. In fact, of course, there is a program about the girl child, in terms of education, but also we have, through the years, you could see that the gap between the boys and the girls were widening as you get into science subjects. So this, of course, if you don't get it at the lowest level, even higher in positions, being engineers, you don't find women engineers. It's because they don't get the right education. And so this deliberate program to change that, to introduce, of course, the STEM, but also offer scholarships and have special schools dedicated to get the girls as an incentive to be able to study the STEM subjects. But also, other than the STEM subjects, also it is still a challenge that because in our tradition, the girl is supposed to be in the household to help the mother, not supposed to be in school. So even those who go to school, they will go to a certain level, but after a while, then you have many dropouts that they have either early marriages or early pregnancies, or just to be able to continue with their house chores. So now, this is the government. Of course, we have many, many other partners, NGOs, who are really working to change that drastically. And again, when you come to STEM, because here you take it for granted. I see young girls here, they are busy on their iPhones and what. You don't get this. Access to internet is like a privilege. Very few people have access to internet, to computers. So it's not only studying STEM on there, but how you can use that technology to be able to transform these lives. And in short, as they say, if you educate a girl or a woman, because you educate a nation, but if you educate a man, you just educate an individual. So this is where we are really putting an effort to make sure that at least we have the girl child get the good education.
Well, in the case of Argentina, our growth strategy has certainly relied a lot in social inclusion, in getting job creation as being at the center of our economic strategy, and that's certainly been including women as well. We have a very important process of including women in our labor market and empowering women. And this also involves getting women rights and including them in the process of strengthening and promoting human rights. For example, when it comes to labor rights, one very important legislation that was passed last year, and I think it's emblematic, was to give women that do domestic work, well, in fact, all domestic workers, but a lot of them in Argentina are women, the same labor rights that other people have in the workforce, to be sure that they are protected, that they have access to the pension system, and to make sure that their contribution to the society is really valued. So I think that to make sure that we have a more participation of women in society, we need to give women the chance to participate on an equal footing on the different aspects of social life. Certainly, education is a relevant piece. Women, in the case of our country, are more than half of our students. So I guess we'll have a growing involvement of women in the future, and certainly they are usually the brightest and the ones that have better qualifications. So I agree with my colleagues that it's a multidimensional sphere where you really need to make sure that human rights are also extended to our women in all the different aspects of life.
So all of you have been in the U.S. representing your countries, and I'm sure you've seen the ways in which women's rights and feminism are discussed in the U.S. Do you see any difference or a gap between how they're discussed at home and how they're discussed here? What is the difference? Are there different issues? Is the language different? Is it, I don't know, sometimes taboo to even discuss it?
Well, In our case, I think that there are some differences, yes, of course. The gender approach really cuts across all the different aspects of our public policy. I think we just want to make sure that all our public policies really consider the female approach as well. But again, as part of a public policy that wants to promote inclusion, that wants to promote equality as a foremost objective. And this is important for our democracy to be stronger, this is important for our economy to be stronger, and this is important for the political system to be stronger in general. So I certainly see some differences, and in our case, this is a cross-cutting issue that has been of very important relevance. And the fact that we have a female president also, I think it's relevant to our political system, because women are there and they are already ruling in a lot of aspects of life.
What about you?
Yeah, because I see the difference in terms of level, because I mean, the discussions, the conversation here is something that is very high. What the women in Tanzania are preoccupied with is day to day to meet their needs. The right to food, the right to education, access to electricity. These are not the issues that preoccupy women in America. So this, when you have the feminist movements, for example, right to abortion, right to what, these are not the real issues, everyday issues in Tanzania. But of course, for women, we know the needs are almost the same. I mean, disadvantaged in terms of employment, in terms of, but so these are the common ones. But then when I'm here, I remember my father used to ask me, he said, you know, I hear Liberata, you are always on platform speaking. Do you ever ask us what you want, what our main preoccupation? So these are the issues with that preoccupy them. It's not maybe what we are discussing here. For them, it's survival. Mm-hmm. For them, it's the right of subsistence. Is where do I get the firewood? You won't be discussing about firewood here. Where do I get water? How many miles I have to walk before I can get water? How do I get to a clinic? To a woman who is about to deliver, but then he has to walk 20 miles before he gets the first clinic. So those are the main preoccupations.
Well, in my case, as you could expect, there's a lot of similarities. Of course, in some respects, you're ahead, but in some respects, you're behind. And one of the things that often shocks me here in the United States is maternity leave, or the lack of maternity leave, compared to the conditions we have in Ireland, imposed and supervised by the European Union. Another area where we're ahead, there's been this extensive discussion, what can we do about the underrepresentation of women in politics? And so a law is now in our statute books, and at the next general election, each political party will have to have a minimum of 30% of candidates from each gender. In practice, of course, this means that they'll be trying to up their numbers of women candidates. So there was a lot of discussion about it. Quotas, even candidate quotas as opposed to outcome quotas, are still quite controversial. But the discourse is further advanced in Ireland than it is in the United States. So it's not to suggest we're ahead in all respects, but I do think one very important difference for us in Ireland is our membership of the European Union. I know the EU often gets a bad press here, bureaucratic, inexplicable in many ways, but it has been a tremendously positive force for improving rights of women in terms of pay and in many, many other areas also.
Let me ask each one of you what you think about the fact that the United States has not yet had a woman president. You've had two in Ireland, you have one now in Argentina. Do you think the timing is right to have a woman president of the United States? And what do you think about the fact that we're still having this discussion in this country?
Well, we're diplomats, so we don't get involved in domestic politics. But having said that, of course, I mean, of course, the time has come. A country like the United States, such a leadership role in the world. Not perfect, not paradise, we all know that, but still a country that is a reference point for so many countries around the world. We are eager, we are impatient for a woman president. But as I say, I'm a diplomat, and so I make no no political comment, just a gender
I was
comment.
just hoping to make some news like Lois was making news with Vice President Biden.
Well, something I can add to that is that when you take a look to Latin America in general, today we have 4 female presidents. So this is something happening in Argentina, but also in other countries. 40% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean is being led by a female president. So certainly this shows a lot of progress in terms of our political involvement. Of course, there are a lot of challenges ahead, and this is a road that is being made and strengthened on its way. So there's more challenges to go. But I think that in the region, and not only in Argentina, we've made a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. Let me also say, of course, join here to say that we don't speak about the internal politics, but I always wonder, and this is what the main question, even in Tanzania. You know, women are almost the majority. For example, in Tanzania, I think they are more than 50%. But the issue said, why don't you elect the women? So the question I put also in America, I said, I know there are competent women in this country. Does it have to be a debate? You have the right to vote. Why don't you vote for women? Oh, this is a challenge I put the Americans. Vote for the women. They are there. They are out there. Of course, people talk about one candidate, but I think they are even more than what you see. So why don't you vote for them?
You should give them a chance.
Yeah. If I could just say, if I can come back on that, I just think it would normalize having a woman leader if the most powerful country in the world had a woman leader. Because it's for every one of us, you know, it's a great privilege to be first in your role. But we all, I think, most women are eager for the day when our gender will no longer be a subject of comment. And you hear all the time, you know, Angela Merkel is talked about in Europe because of her powerful role and so on. But I think, you know, if we had a woman president here and some more women presidents, we could be closer to the day when it would no longer be a subject of wonderment, and it would just be normal. That's what we want.
Well, ambassadors, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for your thoughts and insights.